Hello. Wasn't sure if I was going to need my glasses or not, so I made the print much bigger on my notes, so let's hope so. Yes, I definitely need the microphone, that's for sure. Okay, well, my name's Vonda Lotz. I've been an abolitionist for many years. I was thrilled to get Living Water on board with abolitionism. Just that most people don't really hear about it. We always hear about the pro-life movement. And I know when I had first heard about it, I was like, oh wow, this is what we're supposed to be doing as Christians. So that's how I got involved in that. Here with us too, we have Tammy. Tammy wants to wave in the front. The other three are kind of newer to abolition, but Tammy's with us. She was completely on board with it and just kind of clicked with her. Also, Jennifer, right there in the back. Hi. And then you guys already know Jesus. And Jesus is our wild abolitionist member. He's like our driver when we go places, and if anyone's ever rode with him, you probably know what I'm talking about. But he does a good job. He gets us where we need to go and gets us there fast. And then you guys, Pastor Brad here. So, and we just kind of been working together, starting this ministry. It was almost 2 years ago when we first spoke on it at the church and decided you guys will have the tenets inside the handout we gave you. And one of those tenets is church-driven. So with that, we kind of decided to focus on the churches, because if we can get more people on board, we can spread this message a lot quicker. And so I'm excited. I want to say thank you for having us here. Pastor Andrew and his wife Belinda and the congregation, you guys are so warm and welcoming, and I just really appreciate that. Thank you. So if we can go on, I guess I have the slide thing here. I'm not used to that. Let's see. Oops. Sorry, I guess I got a little click happy. Okay, what is an abolitionist? Well, it's not just a belief. It's not just an opinion. There's different types of movements. So the pro-life, that's a movement, and abolitionism, that is a movement as well. Abortion abolitionist movement began in 2012. It's a biblical worldview. It's different because we don't just come in and say it's an opinion well, abortion's bad or abortion's wrong. Well, yes, we know it is, but we believe in the Bible, and that is what we use for that. We actively work to have change. We are very bold. We don't just go up well, yeah, that's wrong. I mean, we're bold. We believe in speaking the truth in love. We do it the same way. Abolition is the title because of this movement, because it's the same way just as abolitionists did to end slavery. So we've kind of taken on that. I want to read Proverbs 24:11 and 12. Rescue those being led away to death. Hold back those staggering towards slaughter. If you say, but we knew nothing about this, does not he who weighs the heart perceive it? Does not he who guards your life know it? Will he not repay everyone according to what they have done? So what this verse does is it reminds us that we have a command from God to rescue those who are in harm's way. Not just, it doesn't talk, it's not saying necessarily just abortion, but just anyone in God's way. We can't claim we didn't know. So once you hear the truth, I mean, it's not so easy to be oh, they're still killing these babies, even states who say they're not. God will hold us accountable, whether we acted, whether we didn't. When these lives are at stake, he will hold us accountable. And I want to talk about this picture. This is our group, minus Jesus, because he was our driver. And Jeremy. Pastor Jeremy from the Nazarene Church in Chillicothe, he came as well. But these are some people in our group, and we met up with 350 I think a little bit more than that, abolitionist in Washington, D.C., where we were demanding the complete abolition of abortion. So the history of abolitionists. So slavery began in 1619, and some of you may know a little bit about this, and some of you may be like, they had abolitionists back then? I didn't know that. But laws were passed in the mid-1600s to ensure that African slaves was permanent hereditary condition. So anyone born from an African American, they were automatically a slave. So abolitionist dates back to the 1700s. It was like the late early 1700s. They were Bible-believing Christians who fought hard, and they fought really hard against slavery in the 19th century. They believed that no man was ever above another, that we were all created in God's image, and for them, slavery was a sin. I have the 2 Bible verses up there with Genesis 1, 26, 27. Then God said, "Let us make mankind in our image, in our likeness, so that he may rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky, over the livestock and all the wild animals, and over all the creatures that move along the ground." And it says again, "So God created mankind in his own image. To the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them." So it says it like 3 times in those 2 verses that we're all created in God's image. They also believe, Jeremiah 1:5, that God has a plan for us even before he created us. And Jeremiah 1:5 says, "Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. Before you were born, I set you apart. I appointed you as a prophet to the nations." And so back in the slavery days, there were some people who were against slavery. They felt like it was wrong, it was bad, but they didn't want to do anything about it. And abolitionists were the ones who worked to end it. Here are some of the abolitionists that were motivated by their faith. They made the huge impact because of their courage. As abolitionists, we are bold. We are a very bold people. And we stand for what we believe in. It's called obedience to God. And that's what they did. They were obedient to what God said. We have Frederick Douglass. He was a slave who escaped. And so he really risked a lot by, an escaped slave, and he's out there speaking. He spoke to Lincoln. He got in his ear. Asked him to take a stronger stance on slavery. That's boldness. Something he said was the crimes against God and man must be denounced. So he was a Christian abolitionist, and he was protected. Owen Lovejoy, he was an attorney, a congressman. He got in Lincoln's ear as well and constantly encouraged him to take a stand on abortion. William Lloyd Garrison, he ran the Liberator, an anti-slavery newspaper. So they had different ways of doing this. Some people spoke on the streets. Some people wrote in a newspaper. Some talked to politicians. Some did a little bit of everything. Different people did different things. Harriet Beecher Stowe, she wrote Uncle Tom's Cabin. So maybe you guys have heard of her. Okay, so people justified slaves as being less than human. And by her writing about them, that was her way of humanizing them. Because she could write about a child being a slave ripped away from their mother, like just a piece of property. And these other women would read this book, and they would be like, "Oh my goodness, I couldn't imagine my baby being ripped from me." So she humanized them, and that's what that helped the abolitionist movement, because they're like, these are people. These aren't property, people. So she believed they were made in the image of God. They deserved the full freedom like everyone else. She also helped escape slaves She helped run the Underground Railroad. She influenced the anti-slavery movement in Europe. So it went beyond the U.S. That's something we're kind of working on now, bringing this to Mexico. So that's something that's coming in 2026. And it just shows that, like them, when we're obedient to God's commandments, we can change. So even with all the challenges, because there are many times where it feels like we're getting nowhere. And sometimes I'm like, oh goodness, we're getting nowhere. But our movement hasn't been around nearly as long as what this one has been going. And they were able to abolish slavery. So there's no reason why we can't help with abolishing abortion. And all of that depends on God's timing rather than our timing. But we have to be obedient in the meantime. So it's kind of like today when it comes to dehumanizing. Okay, so today's culture, what do they call preborn? They call them clump of cells, tissue, just various things like that. Pro-life regulates the killing of these preborn rather than just saying, no, you're still killing them. You know, it's like, well, I guess you can kill some if we can save some. But, you know, that stage of development does not determine a human being. Just because they may not fully look like us doesn't mean they're less human than us. They have their own DNA. If we take a 1-year-old child and stood them next to a 20-year-old, they don't look the same. I mean, you can tell they're like an offspring, but they're not fully developed. That child is not less of a person than the 20-year-old. So that never determines that. So today's abolitionists, like we stand firm for the preborn. It's made in the image. They're made in the image of God, and they deserve the full freedom and protection. So why we're not pro-life? Well, the difference, I have a little handout inside there, and that kind of describes the difference. We as Christians had to separate ourselves from the pro-life movement. So maybe when the pro-life movement first comes out and it's easy to be like, well, I'm a Christian, I want to be on the pro-life side, not the pro-choice side, because these are the views I align with. But as we started seeing the pro-life like take a stance on certain areas, like set an age limit, heartbeat bills. So, well, as long as a heartbeat's detected, then you can't abort. As Christians, that doesn't matter. Because first of all, the abortionist is the one that gets to check the heartbeat. We know that heartbeat can start earlier. They've detected heartbeats at like 5 weeks. We know that. But they'll say like it's 8 weeks. Something like that. Abolitionists take action to end abortion now. There's like no delay. We want no excuses. We don't do what we feel like is going to make us like we'll win. It's not about winning. We're just being obedient. It's God's battle. We're just doing what we're told in the meantime. We take an uncompromising stance. So these partial measures or laws that allow abortion to stay legal. And that'd be like, I wrote down some of them. So the heartbeat bill, the gestational age, circumstances. So circumstances like rape, incest, and the mother's age. And a lot of times there are Christians, and I've gotten this question a lot. And they'll say, well, let me ask you something. And I know what question's coming. And I'm just standing there like, can I just answer? But I give them a chance. And it's like, well, it's a sad situation, but what if there's a 12-year-old who's raped, a 10-year-old who's raped, gets pregnant? Why would you put that child through that? Well, the first thing I do is ask him, who created that child? Was it the rapist? I mean, who created the child? God creates all life. He created that child, whether it be in another child, We don't know why. It's awful. It is so awful that that has happened. But we can't say, well, we have to kill this child because we don't understand why God allowed that to happen. No, we will help in every single way. There's going to be a lot of counseling. I've had people say, well, she could die in birth. Well, doctor's not going to let the mother die in birth. If she has to deliver early, she delivers early. And there are so many ways around that information. Pragmatic. So they don't focus on what should happen, but what they believe can realistically happen. So they're taking everything inside, like it comes down to winning. Well, we can make this happen. And as abolitionists, one of our tenets is providential. So with providential, it's God's timing. We don't have any control over that. We have no control over when he's going to abolish abortion. We just, again, are obedient in the meantime. That's all that we can do. I know issue 1 was pretty popular, where everyone was voting on abortion in fall of 23. And at that time, we have the pro-life movement. And yeah, they were right. We don't want this to pass. None of us wanted it to go through. But there was false information being put through. Rather than just say, abortion's wrong, abortion's a sin, and yes, it is okay to say that to politicians and in politics, because we don't keep that out of anything. That's who we are. Well, abortion has always been legal through birth in Ohio. They said that would make it legal through birth, but it's always been legal. Because as long as a mother is legally allowed to kill the preborn inside her with no consequences, that's legal. Now, it was legal for her to go and have someone else do it if it's getting close to birth. But if she does, until the child's born, she is allowed to do that. There's never... Oh, and one other thing about that. So there's exceptions to protect the health of the mother. So a mother can go past that gestational age limit because they can say due to exceptions of her health. The problem with the health is they don't specify what type of health. Is it physical health, emotional health, psychological health, financial health? There's so many different types of health that they could look at. There's never, ever a reason to have an abortion. Never. Some people say, and the pro-life says, well, in exceptions, again, another exception, the health of the mother. The health of the mother, you treat both of them are your patients. So one thing, the ectopic pregnancies, I'm sure we all hear about that, right? With an ectopic pregnancy, sure, that child has to be removed because the mother is going to die. But there's a big difference between going to the hospital and having a medical procedure remove that child stuck in the tube. And the child, yes, 80% of the time they've already died in the tube. But even with that 20%, they're going to die the moment they're removed. That's not an abortion. That's removing the child's going to die, the mother lives. And it's a sad situation. Sometimes that happens. The mom might be 20 weeks along and her blood pressure is so wacky, they're like, we have to bring you in or you're going to die. So you have to give birth. They go to the hospital. They don't go in an abortion clinic and rip limbs off to save the mother. Okay, that's an abortion. They go to the hospital and they induce labor and she gives birth and the baby dies because they can't save them at 20 weeks. It's unfortunate, but that happens. That's not an abortion. That's treating both. And unfortunately, they're not going to be able to save most of the time a 20-week-old. So that's something that we get to. It's not like we don't care about the mother. No, we absolutely do. We care about all life. That's the thing, all life. Something with issue 1 too, they said like, well, minors can get abortions and not tell their parents. I'm sure you guys heard that. But minors have been allowed to get abortions since 1985. That's something that they left off of there. Minors can still get an abortion without their parents knowing. All they have to do is fill out a judicial bypass. 16 days later, they go to court. Their parents never know, and they're allowed to get an abortion. One thing as abolitionists too, this is something that I actually just found yesterday, so I hurried up and threw that one in. But as Christians, and we set ourselves apart from pro-life, so a lot of people want to support like pregnancy resource centers. And yeah, I mean, it's great to be able to do that. It's great to be able to help moms. But I think what's more important as a Christian and a church is we have to say, who are we supporting? Just because they're a pregnancy resource center, just because they help moms during their pregnancies, are they gospel-centered? I think that's important to ask, because they can be gospel-centered, but are they? This is from a church website, and under their ministry and partners tab, I click on it, and the first one is this pregnancy resource center. So because Arizona requires and I know the people that go to this church, but because Arizona requires the ultrasound before an abortion, but what I found funny is this is on their church website. And I highlighted, you can use this information to better understand your options and ultimately make the best decision for your situation. That to me is unacceptable. I mean, that's not Christian-like, that's not being obedient. That's being like accepting, like, well, the government said this, so we're going to go along with it. No, we're not. We're a church, and we would never support something like this. So it's always good to check into things like that. Don't just assume like, oh, well, they're doing good for moms, so let's jump on abolition and let's help them. Now, it doesn't hurt to talk to these pregnancy resource centers and say, hey, I'm not a fan of that. I don't think you should be doing that. That's unbiblical. Would you guys be willing to bring in the gospel instead? That's what we should be doing. But I thought that was an important little thing to show you guys. So these are the 5 tenets. I'm not going to go through every single tenet here. They're inside your pamphlet, though, for you to read. But these tenets are what make us abolitionists, especially versus the pro-life. So we have the biblical providential, and I went over a little bit of the providential. We went over the biblical. We've gone through these. Gospel-centered, incorporating that in everything that we do. Church-driven. For us, church-driven is getting the church on board. And I hope you guys, I'm sure you'll have a lot of questions about this, and that's okay. A bunch of us will be over after to answer it. The one I really want to focus on is immediate and uncompromising, and that's kind of what I've been doing right now. But what we want to do is we want to take swift action to end abortion now, no delays, no excuses. Like we're done. We're not doing this. We're not playing this secular game. Abolitionists, well, a lot of times we're called extremists because we refuse all this. We refuse to compromise, and they're like, you got to compromise. We don't compromise with the Bible. We do what it says. We do not compromise. And if that's what makes us extremists, which really is nothing more than name calling, that's fine. I would rather have that than say I'm going to go against something that the Bible says just so I fit in with you. We just believe abortion's a sin. The Bible calls for immediate repentance, not gradual. So when the pro-life says, we want to gradually stop abortion, let's just make it shorter. It was 24 weeks and 16 weeks and 12 weeks and 8 weeks, and let's just gradually do that. That's no, when someone's sinning, you're not well, maybe you can just stop doing this part and just keep doing this, and let's just like slowly wipe away each sin. No, like salvation is immediate. Repentance is immediate, and that's what we push for. This is just a good visual for the abolitionists. So the guy on the right is the pro-life. Pruning the tree, like, well, let's take care. All the little problems are up in the tree. They have all these little problems. And so they're like, well, we'll just take care of this, and we'll take care of that, and this and that. But we all know what happens when you prune a tree. I mean, it just like explodes, right? Abortionists, we want to chop it off. The guy on the left, we want to chop it off from the bottom, because the root of all of this is sin. If we just chop it off, those roots aren't going to have anything, and it's just going to die off. So Moses, he took an abolitionist stance in Exodus chapters 8 through 12. We know about that. So when God commanded Pharaoh to let his people go, Pharaoh kept trying to negotiate. He was offering like partial freedom, and Moses, every time he like would leave and come back, and Pharaoh would offer him something, Moses was like, absolutely not, like no compromise. This isn't happening. I have to be obedient to God. God sends all these different plagues. Pharaoh ends up saying, well, you guys can worship in Egypt. You can do that. Just don't leave. And Moses is like, no. God says we're leaving, and we're taking everybody and everything, with every living thing with us. So then Pharaoh comes back and he's like, well, you can go, just don't go real far. Pharaoh, like, just still being disobedient to God. So God's like sending all these plague after plague. Only the men can go. Moses is like, no, absolutely not. Leave your livestock behind. Now, if you think about it at that point, because what would we do? Like, we can take all the human beings. It's just animals. Like, we'll just leave them. But Moses was like, no. And he's still left without even rescuing his people. Like, that's what we do, like, with abolition. When people don't, they're like, how can you oppose a pro-life bill? We could save some. We could save some of these babies. And they're like, no, we're going to save all of them. God has commanded us to save all of them. There's a woman who runs a pregnancy resource center that came to one of our things that we had. And she was like, well, isn't it better? And we didn't know that's who she was at the time. She was kind of pretending just to be a person that wandered in. And she's like, wasn't it better just to at least save some? And it's like, no, we're abolitionists. Like, no, we don't do that. God doesn't say save some. He says save all. So that's one reason why we take that stance, like Moses. Not a hoof shall be left behind. So Moses demanded total obedience to God. He was obedient, and he was demanding that Pharaoh be obedient to him. And so eventually, this is where we talk about like just putting the full providence of God. Pharaoh had no choice eventually. So if he's not going to be obedient, God's going to do his thing. And there he went. They leave, of course. He changes his mind and follows them. But we know how that worked out. God sent him through the Red Sea, and there went the rest of them. But so God will take care of this. But God doesn't negotiate with evil. Moses was a good example of that, and we should not either. So, even though I'm talking about, okay, we don't compromise, we don't do this, abortion is murder, we still have to be able to get the message across of grace and mercy. There are women, many women, who have had abortions. A lot of times there's at least one, maybe more, in a congregation. And people may think, oh, there's not one in mine, and there probably is. So sometimes speaking about it can be a little bit uncomfortable. And especially for her, because I'm sure what would go through her head is, these people cannot find out because somebody will say something. I don't want them to look at me and think, oh, she did that. But we need to make sure that we're not condemning people for their sin of abortion or any sin. Yes, it's a sin. Yes, it takes an innocent life that God created, but it's not an unforgivable sin. And that's something that we have to let people know. This isn't, if you've asked for forgiveness, you're forgiven. This isn't something, talking about abolition is not about people who have had abortions. Talking about abolition is to stop the murder of these babies. It's to stop future abortions. We don't ever go back and say you did this. We don't ever promote laws that say if someone had an abortion, they need to be charged later. No, we promote laws that say from here on out, if anyone has an abortion, everyone involved should be held accountable for that in a court of law. So with that, the enemy brings shame and Jesus brings total freedom. And we need to be sure that as abolitionists, we are also getting that message across. And this is something we've kind of added more so to the ministry, because a lot of them, you always hear like, oh, did you murder your child? And it's like, you can't say that to people. Like you can't, you can say, yeah, it's murder, let's stop this. But you can't be like, you murderer. Like you're never going to be like, oh, well, you're a thief. Didn't you steal something at 7-Eleven last week? Like before you ask God to forgive you. Like we don't do that. We don't bring any of that part up. So we always want to show a lot of grace in that area, and we want to encourage women to ask for forgiveness if that has happened. And then I'm going to let Pastor Brad talk about this.
How are you? Yep. Good. Man, I'm going to talk to you. And so if you're dozing off because you think this is just a woman's issue, I'm going to ask you to wake up. Because in our culture today, the men need to wake up. You're complicit in the creation of a child. Do you realize that? That there was only one immaculate conception, and that was our Savior, Jesus Christ. So when an infant enters the womb of a mother, men, biology says you're responsible. Now we can argue with some of the stupid science that's going on now, that women can be men and men can be women and men now can get pregnant. Well, we know that that is an out and out stupid lie. But it is one way that Satan tries to use to deceive us by saying that which was normal is now abnormal. That man and woman, as God created in the beginning, that no longer applies. Surely God didn't really say that there were only going to be two genders, two sexes, male and female. Now, one thing that I would like to say to the men and also to the women in this situation, one, I want to reiterate that this is just not a women's issue. You will have those that are in the pro-choice movement and even those in the pro-life movement that will say it's the woman's body and she has the choice as to what happens to her body. And I agree with that in some partiality. She should be able to decide what happens to her body, her blood pressure, her cholesterol, her sugar, her overall health. But the infant that is growing in her womb is not a part of her body. And men, we need to support our women. If we are going to help create that life, because as we understand in biology, there must be a male and female, where sperm fertilizes the egg in order for life to be conceived, then we have a responsibility. It's not a gray area. It's black and white. And too many men over the course of time have not wanted to take responsibility for their actions. They have coerced the person that they have committed this intimate act with to get me out of any responsibility. I don't want to pay child support. I'm too young to be a dad, so on and so on. Whatever excuse, my family will disown me. And we empower the system to be what it is today. Because we are afraid to take a stance, and most importantly, responsibility. Now Vonda has shared with you about our stance on grace and mercy.